Krystal, what are you taking a look at?
Well, guys, there are new reports this week that President Biden is increasingly frustrated with rising prices and his seeming complete impotence to stop their climb. This is from the Washington Post, apparently on a recent trip to Iowa to tout ramping up ethanol production in an attempt to ease gas prices. Biden complained he kind of thought the trip and the policy both complete bullshit. According to the report, quote, Biden dismissed the policy as ineffective and questioned the value of the trip. According to two people familiar with the conversations, after he returned to the White House, he hauled his senior staff, including Chief of Staff Ron Klain, into the Oval Office, badgering them with questions about the purpose of the event. Biden's recent op-ed on how he planned to curb inflation was equally pathetic. Among a grab bag of ideas, his big play was basically, let's just trust the Fed. And in his op-ed, he makes it clear he wants them to crank up interest rates fast and high. He writes, first, the Federal Reserve has a primary responsibility to control inflation. I agree with their assessment that fighting inflation is our top economic challenge right now. And if that wasn't clear enough messaging for the Fed board, he then hosted Fed Chair Jerome Powell at the White House to convey his position in person. Now, we know what massive Fed tightening of the sort that Biden is pushing looks like, and it is a catastrophe for you. It's a recession that chokes wages, destroys jobs, and makes the daily struggle for millions of Americans a living hell. It's not even clear that this will really effectively curb inflation either, since consumer demand is only one piece of the inflation puzzle, and frankly, it's a quickly diminishing piece at that. If the Fed chokes demand but doesn't actually curb inflation, we could enter a devastating period of stagflation that would wreak havoc on our already precariously balanced society. Now, we could in theory address inflation without crushing working class lives, but that would require dealing with corporate greed, supply chain fragility, fossil fuel dependence, and rampant Wall Street speculation. Those things are hard, though, and they're at odds with Biden's standard Washington ideology. So better just to let the Fed take a sledgehammer to your bank account and hope that that does the trick. Now, there's actually a weird and revealing obsession in this Biden op-ed with, quote, not meddling with the Fed. Biden repeatedly assures readers that he thinks doing such a thing would be an unacceptable horror, as if the looming threat of a president giving direction to the Fed is what keeps voters up at night and not, whether or not they can put 3 meals on the table the next day. In fact, Biden's obsession with process and following the rules of the current market-obsessed economic project of the last 40 years are exactly the reason why he's been unable to muster anything approaching an adequate response to the economic moment. Now, there are a million economists' hot takes right now that there isn't really much that Biden could do, but that's only the case if you are wholly unwilling to color outside of the lines of the established order. Now, Biden was elected in part because he represented a safe version of standard neoliberalism. In this case, that standard neoliberalism has been a disaster. So here are a few examples of things that he could do if he was willing to color outside of the lines. Congressman Ro Khanna published an op-ed recently taking aim at Biden's inaction, which made the case for two big things. One, grand experimentation of the type pursued by FDR to deal with the Great Depression, and two, direct market intervention. Now, in my opinion, as you likely know, the best policy for dealing with our present gas woes and future gas woes is nationalization. Take the profit motive out of oil and gas production, put public interest at the center of decision-making so that we can ramp up production in the short term and wind down production in the medium term. But Ro Khanna, he's more of a moderate, and he proposes a few highly worthwhile direct market interventions. Specifically, he wants the federal government to ban exports of oil to increase domestic supply. He wants the Congress to impose a windfall tax on the big oil companies which are currently flush with cash and just using it to pay off their wealthy investors. And finally, he wants the federal government to become a market player in gas and food staples, buying the dip and selling it to the market as prices rise to help smooth prices and avoid the huge shocks that we have been seeing. Now, what's keeping Biden from implementing these ideas, which at least have a chance of curbing rising prices without crushing your life? Well, some Republicans somewhere might say it's too socialisty. In fact, just the suggestion of these ideas by Congressman Khanna was actually met with Fox News diatribes about how such an idea would basically be the end of the country as we know it. Make no mistake, Republicans, they're getting a lot of mileage out of decrying inflation right now, but they have no plans to actually fix it outside of also destroying your life. Now, in addition to these ideas, Khanna and a few other Democrats are also taking a look at whether a loophole allowing rampant Wall Street speculation in the oil markets is also exacerbating inflation at the gas pump. Jonathan Larson over at TYT has been chasing this one down. So listen, no doubt part of the price rise in gas has to do with basic supply and demand issues. But some analysts are now questioning whether that is really the entirety of the story. So oil production is actually up year over year, U.S. domestic production is significantly up and expected to break records in the coming year, so we don't have this huge problem of oil scarcity. Demand is more or less back to pre-pandemic levels, although no cadre of work-from-home warriors and continued global COVID outbreaks have kept oil consumption from getting all the way back to where it was pre-pandemic. So it's also not like we have this crazy, unheard-of level of demand driving up prices. Look, there are other factors as well, Putin's price hike, I suppose, and lingering supply chain issues, but it sure seems like we have an oil market that has become unglued from the basic fundamentals of supply and demand. And when that happens, you can almost always look to Wall Street gambling and fakery. In fact, there is a loophole allowing a particularly reckless form of speculating using fake international swaps that experts have recognized in the past as fueling price spikes at the pump. One expert, who has been completely dead on with this stuff in the past, thinks that just closing that one loophole, or even potentially just threatening to close the loophole, could drop gas prices as much as 25%, though it is really hard to know precisely. Now, that action obviously could be taken just by Joe Biden alone. So why isn't he at least trying it? Well, because Wall Street ghouls would inevitably howl about the injustice of it all and the horrors of regulating markets. So as of today, the ability of speculators to gamble with your bank account, that continues unchecked. For those who want to read the specifics, I will link to Jonathan's article in the description. It is a little complex, but is worth digging into here. Now, finally, let's talk about Putin's price hike. Russia's war on Ukraine is not the sole cause of inflation, of course, but it is decidedly a factor at this point. And while we cannot directly control Vladimir Putin's actions, we do control our response. We did not have to wage financial warfare on Russia. We did not have to ban Russian oil. We did not have to adopt a policy of keeping the war going rather than pressing for a negotiation. But rejecting the economic warfare sanctions regime would also mean rejecting that standard neoliberal mindset that blindly punishes ordinary citizens for the wrongdoing of their leaders. And pushing for peace would mean rejecting another dominant ideology, that of the neocons and the war profiteers who are getting fat and happy with every new billion-dollar check we stroke to the military-industrial complex. Instead, we have adopted a standard Washington policy with predictably disastrous results for really everyone concerned. Biden's political and ideological positioning at the center of Washington orthodoxy, that was supposed to be what made him electable. But it is exactly his thorough commitment to that Wall Street-centric ideology which has resulted in an economic disaster for the nation and a political disaster for the Democratic Party. People really don't care how you get there, or whether some idiot says your idea is socialist. They care that they can buy gas to get to work, make rent, and put meals on the table. Doing what it takes to make that happen is not radical. It is exactly at the center of what the American people deserve. And Sagar, just this morning we're learning Biden sending cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.